So as I said, if you could just remain muted during the session, that would be great so that we can hear. I'm operating from my phone, and Suzanne is here, who will serve as host and help us out with the chat. We're very excited about tonight's session on women and autism. It's something we've wanted to do for a long time. And before I get too far along here, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Melissa Rosenberg. I'm the director of the Howard County Autism Society. And also here is Suzanne Mason, who's our resource and event coordinator. She's on the line as well. We have 4 terrific panelists who I think will set us up for just a terrific conversation. And Suzanne, have you started to record? Awesome. All right, very good. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to do introductions. The way we'll flow this evening is that I'll introduce our 4 panelists. They'll each have 5 or 10 minutes to talk about their journey or what they do or their experiences to share with you. And then we will open it up for some general questions and also questions from all of you. If you have questions as we go along, I'm going to ask you to please type those in the chat and remain muted. We do have 40 people who registered. So if you are not speaking, if you could mute, that would be great. And I want to introduce, first of all, we have 2 self-advocates with us tonight. Caitlin Conklin, who lives actually near me in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is really fun. Caitlin is a self-advocate. She's had many life-enriching experiences that she believes have been instrumental in preparing her for administrative career and disability inclusion. Among these experiences was serving as a congressional intern. And as an intern, she enjoyed assisting congressional constituents and gained valuable firsthand insight into public policy making. Another accomplishment that Caitlin is proud of, it was her transformative experiences as a student at Montgomery College, which is here in Montgomery County, Maryland, and American University. While at AU, she first learned that she was on the autism spectrum. She graduated with a BA in history and a 3.48 cumulative GPA. After graduating from college, Caitlin became a tutor to inspire students through learning. A focus of her teaching and community service was on students with learning challenges. Over the years, she's provided administrative support to companies and nonprofit organizations. Caitlin is the Association of University Centers on Disabilities Operations and Meetings Assistant. She provides administrative, logistical, and customer support for the AUCD network, teams, and other stakeholders. In her free time, Caitlin has dedicated herself through volunteering to assist low-income members of the disability and LGBTQIA communities, both of which she belongs to, in accessing food and other resources. So I'm going to welcome Caitlin. I'm going to introduce the rest of our panelists, and then we'll have each of them spend about 5 or 10 minutes. Person I'd like to introduce is Carly Fulgham. She's a self-advocate, and I know her through the Autism Society of America, where our organization is one of the affiliates. Carly didn't get her diagnosis until she was 28 years old and credits that moment with changing her life for the better. After re-entering society after years on Social Security disability, she is now a mother, wife, and operations strategist for a major national bank. She's the first autistic president of the board of directors of the Autism Society of Ventura County in California, and the affiliate's 2016 Awesome in Autism Individual of the Year. Additionally, she's vice president of the Autism Society of California. She serves on the board of directors of the Autism Society of America and as chair of the panel of Autism Spectrum Advisors. In 2018, she was named Autism Society of America Volunteer of the Year, and in 2019, she was one of the 124 employees out of over 200,000 at her day job to win a Global Disability and Inclusion Award for her efforts. Her advocacy passion is education about women and girls with autism, as well as outreach to both employers and prospective employees with autism to enable a more diverse and inclusive workplace. So welcome, Carly, all the way from California, joining us tonight. Next up, we have Allison Ratto. She is a clinical psychologist with the Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at Children's National Health System. Dr. Ratto received her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She completed her pre-doctoral internship at Children's National, as well as postdoctoral fellowship in the Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at Children's, prior to becoming a member of the faculty. She specializes in assessment and treatment of ASD and related developmental disorders, particularly in young children and intellectually disabled youth. Dr. Ratto speaks Spanish fluently and has a strong interest in working with families from Spanish-speaking backgrounds. Her research includes girls and women with ASD, cultural differences in the manifestation and assessment of ASD, and reducing disparities in access to ASD assessment and treatment for underserved communities. And then our fourth panelist that we're welcoming tonight is Molly Whalen. So we thought it would be kind of to round out the panel to have a mom of a young woman with autism. Molly is currently State Director for Best Buddies Capital Region, Virginia and DC. Her passion has long been supporting the movement for inclusion, and in her role, she serves as a catalyst and connector in building collaborations to greater serve the local disability community. Prior to joining Best Buddies, she served as Executive Director of the DC Association for Special Education, where she led advocacy outreach and partnership engagement on behalf of special education schools, families, and students with disabilities. So we welcome all of our panelists. And I'm going to ask Carly if she would start us off this evening to talk about her journey. And Carly, will you go ahead and share with us?
Sure. Thank you so much, Melissa. It's so great to be here today. I'll apologize everybody in advance if my toddler runs in and yells something inappropriate. He's been known to do that. But I'm really grateful to be able to be here to share my story and to hopefully help you along your journeys. I grew up in the Midwest, and DSM-4 with Asperger's didn't even come out until after I graduated from high school. So back in those days, it was unheard of to have a female on the autism spectrum. I was in all the talented and gifted programs because I made it a study to figure out how to communicate, how to get along with people. In my early years, I spent nearly a year speaking in commercial jingles, just because they had the sentences preformed for me. So if you asked me how I was doing, I'd say, have a Coke and a smile, things like that. But once I sorted through communication, I realized that there were still some differences. I was still having problems with miscommunication. Some things that seemed like they were obvious to other people weren't so obvious to me. And so I was able to sort my way through with coping mechanisms. And I like to joke that I made my own IEP because I call in sick on a big test day so I could take it in a private room the next day as a makeup test. Things like that. I worked my way through. When I got to college, I would look at the course catalog and I'd say, oh, okay, you have to write a paper every Friday for this class, but you only have to do 2 big ones a semester for that class. So I would negotiate my way through college like that to find the classes that would work best for me and my learning style. And then in the work world, I found myself going in and getting hired to do X, and I'd find all the problems that were wrong with X, and I'd do process improvement suggestions, and then I get bored and I'd want to move to a new job. Although there was one job that I quit because my boss was a yeller and I just couldn't be around all that yelling all the time. And so all of this was before I even knew that things like sensory issues existed. And all along I was having problems socially. So I couldn't keep friends more than 6 months in general. I had trouble keeping boyfriends for more than 3 months. I had well-meaning people in my life who would sabotage relationships with men because they were afraid I was going to get taken advantage of. And in the meantime, I'm just like, why did this guy just disappear? I'm like, what's wrong with me if they don't call me back for a second date, things like that. So I ended up in my mid-20s with major depressive disorder, and I ended up on Social Security disability. I had thought that I was on the East Coast at that when I started to have my major burnout, and I thought a move to the West Coast would be a change of scenery. And I'm smart; I can figure all this out, why I'm having problems. And I ended up in a 400 square foot apartment in East Hollywood. And there's a reason why you've never heard of East Hollywood. You do not want to go there. It was a what they call a bachelor apartment. So there was no kitchen, but I set up like a microwave in the walk-in closet on the way to the bathroom. I basically stopped going out in public. I only went out to go to my therapist twice a week or to go to the grocery store because they didn't deliver back then. And my executive functioning skills really started to break down. I knew I needed to recycle because that was something that was always important in my family. And back then you had to take the recycling of bottles and cans to the grocery store. But I couldn't put the steps together to actually recycle. So I ended up with 3 foot deep bottles and cans in my apartment. You had to wade through to get around in my apartment just because I knew I needed to recycle. I couldn't bear to throw them away, but I couldn't get my act together to actually recycle them. And that's just one example, but it was, I was able to get on Social Security disability in part because of things like that. But it was literally a Time magazine that I saw on the checkout line at the grocery store that changed my life. The cover story was a little boy with autism, and I thought that looks interesting, and I bought it. It took me another 3 months to read it, and when I did, I was blown away. And because it's one of my things, I didn't want to mark it up. I made a photocopy of it, and then I went at it with a yellow highlighter. And I took it into my therapist, and she was blown away too because she'd never had a patient with autism before. So it took us a year of battling the insurance company for an adult diagnosis and then getting through the waiting list at UCLA for me to finally get my diagnosis. And I was lucky to live in California because we have a really great state support system for people with autism. So my diagnosis of autistic disorder, I was able to get services, home support services, independent living services, and really get back on my feet and re-enter society. And from there, I went back into the workforce part-time and gradually ended up as a temp at my current company back at the height of the mortgage crisis, helping out with vacant properties in Alaska. But they realized that I had more to offer than that. So within 18 months, I'd gotten a huge promotion, like way up the ladder. When I tell people at work how big of a promotion I got, they're floored because they've never heard of anybody moving up that quickly. And now I'm poised to handle strategy for a major division at the company. And it's through this company that I found volunteering, and I started volunteering back in like 2014, 2015, and I was at a special needs resource fair, and I found a table for the Autism Society. And I said, "Oh, I have autism. Tell me more about what you do." And 3 months later, they elected me president. So of my local affiliate. So I really love giving back. And I do seminars and workshops on girls with autism, work accommodations, things like that. And so I'm just really thrilled to be here. And I hope that I didn't take up too much time with my long spiel.
Not at all. Not at all. Carly, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have the Time magazine? I know you showed me.
I do.
She held that up for me the other day when we were talking.
There we go.
And that was 2002.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Great
Yep.
story. Thank you so much for sharing. That's terrific.
Mhm.
Caitlin, could we call on you next? Please tell us about yourself and your journey.
Okay. Hi, I'm Caitlin. I am honored and humbled to serve as a panelist during this evening's discussion. I want to thank again Melissa and the Autism Society of Howard County for inviting me to talk with you and share my personal story. As Melissa mentioned, I work as the Operations and Meeting Assistant for the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, headquartered in Silver Spring, although we're all working from home because of the COVID-19 situation. As you know, AUCD supports a network of centers at colleges and medical institutions across the U.S. that are advancing the field of disability studies. This research and advocacy work pertains to autism and other developmental disabilities. For going on almost 50 years, AUCD has been working on increasing job and educational opportunities and political representation for people with disabilities. I highly recommend checking out AUCD's website at www.aucd.org. The website provides useful resources for people with disabilities, their families, and allies. I also want to share with you aspects of my personal story as it relates to me being on the autism spectrum. During my early childhood, I felt sort of different somehow in my mannerisms, namely being very anxious socially and having a formal nature to my speech and dress. I was especially anxious around strangers. My parents and I did not have a clear idea during my young childhood that I am on the spectrum, despite us consulting several doctors. I too didn't get a formal IPE while I was in primary and secondary school. The school district that I attended put me in slower classes and advanced classes in high school, sometimes simultaneously. In 2007, at the age of 25, I graduated with BA in history from AU. A few months before graduating, my very astute psychologist at the time brought to my attention that I might be on the autism spectrum. The psychologist recommended that I see another psychologist for a more formal educational and psychological evaluation. The latter psychologist and the education consultant he worked with diagnosed me as having developmental disabilities in executive functioning and a disability in writing expression. After graduating from college, I started looking for work and had a very hard time finding a job, even with a great GPA from a good college. At that time, I was interested in becoming a teacher and working in administrative support capacity, but I received no mainstream job offers. My first job out of college was walking my neighbor's dogs. I later branched out to working on a very limited basis, 1 or 2 weeks a year performing clerical work for my neighbor's landscaping business. I did this work until this year. A year and a half after graduating with no mainstream work and as the economy entered the not so great recession of 2008, I made the difficult decision to go on Social Security supplemental income to financially take care of myself. For over 12 years, I received SSI until recently when I started working. Last year, I made a renewed and concerted effort to get a job. During this period, I had approximately 40 interviews. While preparing at the West End Library in DC for one of these interviews, I took a break and found myself in the section with books on medical conditions that children have. It was there that I first saw the book entitled Autism in Girls by authors Temple Grayson, Tony Atwood, and Anita Lesko. Given my dismal record of getting job offers, I was curious to know if the authors had any good advice for parents and guardians of girls on the spectrum with helping prepare for independent living and life after school. The authors did. They present a great timeline of important steps that parents and girls on the spectrum should take to help the latter prepare for self-sufficiency and financial independence as young adults. After almost 40 interviews, I finally received a job offer, which I gladly accepted. I succeeded in getting this job through the help and support of my mom, my grandmother, and my employment specialist, Allison Nadler. Allison works for the Jewish Social Services Agency in Montgomery County. As you may already know, one of Jessa's focus is helping and supporting people with disabilities find and keep meaningful employment. The link for Jessa is www.jssa.org. Based on my personal experiences, I highly encourage parents of children on the spectrum in elementary and middle school, if they haven't already, to start finding support service for their children and receiving these services. As you probably well know, the Kennedy Krieger Institute is a great local resource. Also, I recommend that high school students and college students on the spectrum get volunteer experience and work experience before they graduate. This experience will go a long way in helping prepare those on the spectrum with bridging the gap between primary school and college and employment. My other recommendation is those that are out of school should seek out the vocational services provided by their state's Department of Rehabilitation Service. I welcome your questions and feedback about what I said.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was just terrific. And Caitlin and I met when she interviewed for our new autism hiring program. And I was really impressed with her self-awareness and just her story. And we were absolutely going to take her, and doggone if she didn't get a job right away. So no surprise. And so thank you.
Eventually it came about.
Well, also, I just want to let everybody know, we do have a list of these resources. I know Caitlin shared some websites, and we'll be sharing a list of this. We'll email it to you all. And it'll also be on our website after the webinar. So don't worry about writing those down. We will have them for you. So next up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ratto to share with us what she does. And she's got a PowerPoint. She's going to share her screen here in just a minute.
Yes, indeed. Here we go. See if I can do this adequately. Does that show up as you expect it to?
I see it. I see it.
Click on the button on the bottom that looks like a book. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we're good? All right. Thank you, Carly. Cisco is newer to me. I do not use it, or WebEx rather. This version of WebEx is newer to me. So thank you all for your patience. I'm Dr. Ratto. I'm a clinical psychologist at Children's National, and I got into working with girls and women on the spectrum very much in the back end, so to speak. I came in very interested in autism in general, and specifically in the experience of culturally diverse folks and people who have difficulty getting access. And my boss, Dr. Lauren Kenworthy, came to me one day and said, "Girls and women, I know you don't traditionally think of them as an underserved community, but I promise you in autism they are." And it's been some of the most surprising and rewarding work I've done, getting to be involved in both clinical work with younger people on the spectrum, as well as in research where I get to work with adults. I collaborate with a couple different autistic women who are in executive positions in the self-advocacy community who work with us as partners in research, and I've learned a lot. So I'm really excited to be here as a part of this panel. As an academic, I live on PowerPoint. I live on data and lots of information. So I wanted to share a little background of how clinicians and the research community think about girls and women on the spectrum. And one of the things I will say has been most valuable to us as clinicians and researchers is really just the words of autistic girls and women, because we tended to ignore them for many, many years. It is still very easy to find research studies on autism that include one female participant or 0 female participants. So they've really been missed. And a lot of the conversation that's happened recently in our sort of scientific and clinical community has been, how has this happened? What's been the things that have gotten in the way? And one of the things that I'm sure our panelists will talk a little bit more about, my fellow panelists will talk a bit more about, is this experience of being missed and what goes into that. How are they masked or camouflaged, or what are we doing as clinicians and researchers where we're not hearing them? So one of the ways that I get into this conversation is by talking about the experiences I've had actually working with autistic girls and what that's like clinically, what I tend to see. And this may resonate for some of you attending today, and for, it sounds like a little bit at least for some of our panelists, that these girls are often missed. They're not diagnosed as toddlers, and we're doing better about getting them when they're still girls before they become women, but it's definitely not universally the case. So one of the earliest girls that I saw on the spectrum was a girl named Cheyenne. That's what I'm calling her, who was 10 at the time that I saw her. And early on in life, no one was really worried about her. She was hitting all of her developmental milestones on time. She had some unusual ways of playing and some sensory differences, but nothing that was really getting in her way until preschool, where teachers started to say, you know, she doesn't seem to have the same social boundaries as other kids, and she's struggling with learning. And no one could really quite put their finger on what was happening with her. And she didn't really get any supports or diagnoses until she was about 8, when she was diagnosed with auditory processing disorder. And then her journey really started at 9, where she had a very sudden onset of intense chronic pain that was so debilitating that this girl who previously had been a dancer was unable to go to dance class. She was getting around in a wheelchair. She had very intense pain that she couldn't process, and no one could quite figure out what was happening with her. By the time she made it to my office, she'd been seen by 50 different medical professionals, and unfortunately, that journey of seeing many, many professionals before you get to the right one is not uncommon. And it was finally a concussion specialist who'd done some training in our clinic who said, "Oh, I think this might be autism. You should go get assessed." And sure enough, she was on the autism spectrum. And that journey, though it often happens, unfortunately, much later, is very common, that it takes a lot of different people seeing a girl to sort of figure out that she's on the autism spectrum, or to even wonder that whether or not she might be. And part of the reason for this is that we just don't diagnose girls as often. There are 4 boys or men to every 1 girl or woman on the autism spectrum. So it's a very, that means 80% at least of people on the autism spectrum are boys and men. And in many research studies, it's even more imbalanced than that. So we went many, many years where we had little or no data on girls, and we weren't even asking the question really about whether or not autism looked different in boys versus girls. And what we've seen over time is that as we've gotten, some of you may have heard about the autism epidemic or the autism pandemic, which seems like very alarmist language now in particular. As we've gotten better and better at recognizing autism, which is how most of us think of it, is we've actually gotten really good at diagnosing it in boys, and that gap between boys and girls is steadily growing over time, where in fact we're getting better and better at diagnosing it in boys and not getting better as quickly at diagnosing it and recognizing it in girls. And there's a lot of different theories as to why that is. We think biology plays a role. We think our gender expectations as a society play a role. And we also think our limitations as scientists are a part of it. So in terms of the biology, we know that generally speaking, any developmental disorder that you can think about is going to be, on average, much more common in boys than in girls. And that has to do with how their chromosomes are set up. The XY chromosome, having an X and a Y versus an X and an X, puts you at much greater risk for sex-linked disorders. Testosterone has been linked to slower rates of brain maturation and higher risk for learning differences. So being male is sort of a risk factor for your development getting messed up. So we know that that's one big reason, just biologically, that autism is always going to be more common in boys and men than it is in girls and women. But we know that's not the whole story. There's also this socialization piece where, as much as we try as parents to buy trucks for our girls and dolls for our boys, we still manage to have different expectations for boys and girls and to treat them differently from the minute they are born. Right there in the hospital room, scientists have somehow managed to wiggle their way into that room and do studies on this. And from infancy, we are treating them differently. so that as infants, girls end up smiling more, making more eye contact, paying more attention to faces, and being calmer and better emotionally regulated. And then when they go off to preschool, they start engaging in more kind of active, extended play. We expect them to do more pretending and tea parties and fewer chasing games and cops and robbers. And so they get more practice talking about feelings, and they get more messages that it's really important to think about what other people are thinking and feeling and to behave appropriately. So they end up having better social skills and better relationships with their peers. And when they're having some of the difficulties related to autism, it's harder to see them because they're kind of under this layer of better social skills overall. And finally, there's this research component, which is that early on, and sort of holding true to this day, autism is most commonly identified in boys and men. And our research is most commonly done with boys and men. And we've developed all of the tools that we use to make diagnoses on boys and men. And then if you want to get into research studies now, we say, here's this tool that we developed based on boys and men with autism. And you, as a girl or a woman, have to meet criteria for autism based on our boy-based definition. And so we don't get as many girls in our studies. And then we continue to just learn more about boy autism and not as much about girl autism. So we're really sort of staying behind this times. And there's a group of us now in the research community that are really pushing back against this and saying, do we have to keep using these tools? Are these tools the only definition of autism? Or can we bring in other new tools that might be better at catching girls and women so we can actually do research with them? So what all of this means is that girls, as you've heard from two very accomplished women tonight, tend to be diagnosed later than boys. They tend to struggle more socially later in life because they haven't gotten the help that they need to really understand some of this, and thus tend to have some more mental health issues. We tend to see higher rates of things like anxiety and depression and eating disorders. Many girls and women who end up being diagnosed with autism have talked to us very generously or on the internet in autistic communities about the experience of being incorrectly diagnosed and being subjected to inappropriate medicines or therapies that really weren't useful or helpful, and that further delayed our process in getting the right diagnosis. And so many of them don't get a first diagnosis until adulthood, we're finding. And it may really be that they are self-diagnosed, that they find the Time magazine in the checkout aisle, or they read something on the internet and they say, oh, this is me. And they end up having to convince people with letters after their name, like myself, that they're right about this. And it's often very much an uphill battle. So what does it look like? How do we know when we're seeing autism in a girl? What I will say is that this is kind of our best guesses as of right now. This is still very controversial, and there are definitely scientists in the community that would tell me to stop talking, that it looks exactly the same, and that I'm wrong about this. So we need a lot more research here, but our best guesses at this point are that girls and women do seem consistently to have better pretend play when they're young, and that's a big signal that us autism diagnosticians look for in young children. Do you have pretend play? And if you have pretend play, it's almost like an immediate check. Nope, can't possibly have autism. They often have really strong language skills, which again kind of goes against our biases about who can be autistic. And a lot of girls and women have talked to us really helpfully about their ability to look and watch what other people in a social situation are doing and then mimic that behavior so that they start to blend in with their peers, and we don't really catch on just how hard they're working at that. A lot of them can seem shy or anxious at times and be good at kind of initially meeting friends, but struggle at keeping those friends over time. We know that while they can be really good at pretend play, they often can be more bossy or repetitive or inflexible in their play. So it might look really good, but the minute we throw a wrench in it, then sometimes that kind of throws things off for them and they're no longer interested in pretend play. And one thing that's garnered a lot of interest in recent years is that the boys and men on the autism spectrum tend to have very clear, unusual, what we call restricted interests, right? So they are intensely obsessed with things like stoplights or toilet flushing mechanisms. Trains is another classic. And our girls tend to be big bookworms. I meet a lot of girls who read, and that's their restricted interest. And they'll get really into the fan communities related to a particular book series, or they'll be interested in animals or dolls. So it's things where if a parent says, oh, my girl is obsessed with Harry Potter, it's not the kind of thing that's going to raise eyebrows in the same way that a child who's obsessed with maps or flags might. And again, they tend to have much higher rates of anxiety and depression, of eating disorders, and we're learning very tragically of being traumatized, abused, and in particular sexually victimized, which is something I'm very concerned about and talk to my families about in terms of risks that they need to watch out for. As I was talking about earlier, a lot of folks, girls and women on the spectrum, talk about that they've learned how to sort of blend in, how to camouflage, and there's lots of different names for it out there in the community. Camouflaging, masking, compensating. It's a fast-moving target in terms of what we call it, but the basic idea is you've learned social behaviors that help you blend in and not stand out. And that can really make it very hard for someone like me to make an accurate diagnosis if someone's gotten really good at that over the years. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is this idea that comes from Dr. Stephen Hinshaw, who's a well-respected psychologist, though not an autism specialist, who talks about this triple bind that girls and women generally face in our society, which is that we're supposed to be the perfect girl, right? Be sugar and spice and everything nice. But we still have to excel like a boy, right? Title IX happened. We have all the same rights as boys. And so we have to be the best athlete and the smartest in the class. We need to do all the STEM things and be the leader. And all of that has to happen while you're still looking sexy, but not slutty, just sexy. It's a really tough challenge that we're asking girls and women to thread in general. And for any girl who's neurodiverse, who's on the autism spectrum or has another neurological developmental difference, they have all these roadblocks in the way that make all of this even harder in reading these expectations and figuring out how to meet them. So it's unsurprising that these girls on the spectrum are often dealing with quite a few emotional challenges. They're often getting this diagnosis right around the time that they're entering their adolescent years. And they're having to navigate all these really complicated teen relationships, which are a mess, whether or not you're on the autism spectrum, and being on the spectrum just makes them exponentially harder. There's all sorts of new hygiene routines as we get into having our periods, going through puberty, figuring out sexual health, that are really hard. And a lot of women have talked to us very helpfully about the challenges that are inherent in trying to figure out how you have a romantic relationship without being victimized. It's a really tough time. And so this is a period of time that I really talk to parents about being very cautious of. And so what I tell them to do for any parents on the call is to talk to their daughters about their diagnosis. It should not be a big family secret. It should be something that they know about and that they can advocate for themselves around, that they can build pride in, that they can build a neurodiverse community for themselves of people who may have some similar experiences, who are affirming and welcoming of their identity, and to help them find what is beautiful about their autism. There are all sorts of challenges with it, and society tends to focus on that. But what are the gifts that come from their autism? What are the gifts that they have as a human being to offer the world and to celebrate about themselves? What do they want to do with that? How do they want to build a meaningful life for themselves? And if we can focus on kind of building those positive things instead of constantly trying to fix what's wrong, it tends to be a much more positive, affirming, happy experience of adolescence. So with that, I think I can stop sharing my screen and say thank you all for tolerating my non-neurodiverse brain that thrives on PowerPoint. Thank you. And I will let the next person talk.
Thank you, Dr. Ratcher. That was excellent. Really appreciate that. And I know that we, from time to time have a woman who will come to us in her 30s, 40s, 50s with kind of that aha moment. And I also appreciate that you talked about the many gifts. I mean, these are women who are writers and social worker, teachers, and so thank you so much. And we do have family members are a big part of this, and parents, of course. And I'd like to turn now to Molly Whalen. And Molly, if you take the floor now and tell us about yourself and your daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you putting me last because it was a check for me to see how well I'm doing as a mother, connecting to Carly and Caitlin's story, and then of course Allison's expertise. There's a lot of connectivity for certain. But I'm currently the state director of Best Buddies for Virginia and DC, and I kind of echo the great work of that Jess is doing and many others. We actually have a jobs program as well. So I may have to tap Caitlin and Carly to come and talk to some of our female jobs participants. This is terrific networking, but I've made a career out of working in special education advocacy and developmental disabilities community because really of my two children. My 21-year-old son has autism, just recently graduated from the Ivy Mount School and is at Montgomery College right now virtually. And my 18-year-old daughter is at the Catherine Thomas School and she has autism. It's so interesting to listen to you all talk. So I feel like I'm going to kind of duplicate a little bit. So I'll try not to go on too long because you guys did such a great job. But she was diagnosed pretty early at 3. And I'll tell you why, because we were spending a lot of time at occupational therapy offices and speech therapy offices for her brother. And how you talked about it looks different in girls. I had, her brother's 2 years older than her, and we had him diagnosed a little after age 3. And she was delayed in speaking and starting to have some tantrums, but very social, very sing-songy, so many different things. And she looked completely different. And I was a little shocked when the OT and the speech therapist who were seeing my son said, we think you should have her evaluated. And, when this was in 2002, so I was laughing, Carly, while you were looking at that magazine, Katie was born. So I think it kind of talks about how far things have come. And I can vividly remember when the diagnosis came for Katie, I was pretty positive. My spirit is kind of like, no matter what happens, I can keep going. And the speech therapist and OT, came out with them, and I think they were expecting me to be the same person who's been engaged with them. And I kind of just melted along the door jamb. I kind of just, my legs gave out because I thought, and for you all, and you know this, like and certainly in 2005 when Katie was getting diagnosed, there weren't a lot of resources. It was really hard to find anything. No states were covering, ABA, let alone, a lot of speech therapy and occupational therapy. And I thought, there's no way I can do this. Kind of fast forward, we just kind of put one foot in front of the other. She had an IFSP, she had an IEP. We went through public schools, not the best, but she always gravitated towards boys. Later a speech therapist said, they talk less, Molly, and the girls talk so much. And with her, she had, definitely had more, inabilities to hide it or, kind of like skate through. And so the boys she could play with without having to process all the language. And I think that was really interesting and why she, kind of gravitated towards them and, try to be there. Very much a lot of pretend play for sure. And then in second grade, never really had friends. Now everybody was friendly, but none of those kind of best friends. And in second grade, 2 new girls came to the school, and the 3 of them clicked like you would not believe. And to my eyes, by that point in second grade, I knew exactly that those other 2 girls had autism. And they really got to know each other really well. Of course, the science of the school, they said, oh, well, they're finally making friends. Next year, let's separate them into 3 classes so that they can use those skills now to meet others. And of course, we were like, no, they finally have their posse. They've got it. Interestingly enough, one parent was pretty open and followed the instinct and at that time got a diagnosis. Another parent really just was turned off by it. So it was, even in that journey of like how things go along, she ended up changing schools to, we're in DC, and we sent her to a public charter school because we thought the atmosphere would be a little smaller, and it was a very positive public charter school. That was around fourth grade. Again, lots of good therapy, lots of, good supports and things. I will tell you what I failed, and I'm really embarrassed, Allison, because you said it on the last slide, but of course we only have 2 children and they both have autism. So we didn't really talk a lot about their diagnosis because autism was the family. I mean, we went about it. We weren't hiding it, but we just never really defined it. And 5th grade, her social worker came to me and said, she's really struggling. She doesn't understand why her homework looks different and why she's not clicking. And so we decided to have this big meeting where we had this, diagnosis call. And I'll tell you that it's great to have professionals in the room, but when we're all sitting there, they kind of, I started and they all just kind of got quiet because they were like, let you do it. So and again, there's more resources now, but we were like, how do we explain to a young girl who has language challenges anyway, to, what autism is? And so I kind of just leaned on your brain works differently, and the things that are hard for you, like communicating and talking to people and deciphering things or figuring out why some people like to do this and you don't, and how that works, and being always having to want to be in the front of the line or the back of the line because she couldn't be in the middle of the line because it was too sensory. So we kind of went through all this, and she grasped it like I had thrown her a lifesaver, and her whole year changed that time, and she just embraced it. And she would tell people, well, my favorite food is spaghetti because I have autism, and my favorite color is pink because I have autism. And one time they were all on the playground, and one of the teachers said, Katie, you can be the leader to bring everybody off. And she said, come on, everybody, follow the girl with autism, so she'd march along. So she wore it as a badge of honor. But as middle school went on, she really felt alone. And of course, in education today, things can be really, while we embrace the disability, a lot of parents sometimes don't. And I really appreciate what you said, Allison, about take that disability. You can make the stigmas go away how you treat it, but our children need to know that. I mean, and know what they are, what they're facing, and how they can be self-advocates about what it looks like to them. And she really thought she was the only child in that entire school of 1,200 students that had autism. And of course, you can't really go, well, that boy and that boy, and people, but it was really, really challenging for her, and she just felt so out of it. In the end, the school actually moved us to and we're here in the DC area, many of you all know, non-public special ed schools, and she goes to an excellent one, Catherine Thomas School, and the public school system sent her there. And it was really a bit of a safety issue. She, for many of our girls and students, their focuses can be so different from their chronological age peers. I used to joke that, when she was in 6th grade and things were really getting different, her peers were into kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and she was still into My Little Ponies. And, and it was we talked about, it was just getting like, it was unsafe, it wasn't, she didn't have a posse at the school and everything else. Since she's gone to Catherine Thomas, it's been an amazing journey. She's done so well. The classes are smaller. There's a lot of other kids with autism. There's a lot of other kids. Everybody there has a disability. It kind of becomes normal, but there's a lot of focus on what are your skills? What are your gifts? She's an incredible artist. She taught herself to sew using a sewing machine. She can sew clothing. She kind of, without a pattern, she'll go into a store. Her favorite thing to do is go to Michael's or Joanne Fabrics and get fabric and then just create something with it. So her visions, she desires to get into videography. We really have embraced that. And I will say, it was great for you all to mention Temple Grandin. And I once went to a speech that she gave back in 2006 here in the Washington area. And I got a chance to talk to her for a few minutes, and she said, and I said, as a mom, what would you suggest? Give me some advice. Is there anything as a parent? And she said, one of the greatest things my mother ever taught me were manners, because she said, I don't really I don't do manners because of empatheticness to other people. She goes, I know that this is like a play that I have to act. And if I say thank you and please and do this, things just work better for me and I can get through, I can navigate. And she said, as much as you embrace the autism for your children, they still have to navigate society. And while we would love for society to change and embrace everyone with a difference, we also know the reality is that just doesn't happen. And if you can give your child with autism an understanding of what the rules are to navigate, they may not really feel them, but if they understand that those are important to kind of get where they want to do, that they really have that navigation. And so sometimes, mine, especially Katie, loves to kind of push the envelope now. When she learns swear words, she really learns swear words. And she takes, she also comes, like you all said about the scripting, like she comes up with these things, like she can say anything as long as she says no offense first. So she used to say to a teacher, well, no offense, but your hair looks really awful. And we'd be like, Katie, you can't say that to someone. And she'd say, I said no offense. So these scriptings, I don't know if I can say this. I apologize if someone's sensitive about swearing, but I would get lots of calls from the school social worker that say, well, we have Katie in the classroom. And she apparently told her geometry teacher when he asked her a question, are you fucking high? And we can't have this language. So, and then, she said to me, well, Mom, do you know what high means? And I was like, yeah, but I think the issue was that you said fucking first. So, it's been a journey. I also really want to have that piece that Caitlin and Carly said. One of the programs that this school does have for their high school students is internship programs. And Katie, as I said, is an incredible gifted creative soul, and they were smart enough to match her up at a Michael's store, and she literally got assigned the bead aisle. And she would go, they would go to the internship, every day for like 2 hours, and she completely reorganized and cleaned up their bead aisle, which was kind of a mess, and everybody just left in a mess. And the manager was so impressed that she could do it without even the map that they gave, and with that. And I think it's that piece that also shows employers what a valuable gift. She was so interested. She loved ordering, she loved, in fact, it was also a great time for her to kind of shop in the bead aisle store because she does jewelry and things. But it really gave her a sense of like, wow, my gifts can be are important, and the Michael staff likes me and I can do this. Fortunately, COVID kind of stopped. She was going to go for a summer job this last summer, and it kind of stopped there. But I do think it's all of those pieces. And I'd say for any parents, again, the embracing of the disability and getting, one of the things we talk a lot about is like, how do you say it? Come up with your talk. How do you want to tell people that you have autism, what is important? And recently I helped I come from a large family, and I have a cousin in Buffalo whose son was just diagnosed with autism, and Katie asked to make a movie or a video to send to my cousin, his mother. And it was really impressive that she said, these are the things he might feel. And, he might not look at you in the eye, and sometimes sounds really bother him, but might bother him. I know it does with me, but just let him have some ways of putting his hands over or different things. And it was so empowering and I hope that that's what we're doing here, is kind of this generation talking to the next generation, both parents of children and young girls with autism, but also, from connecting with other, women who have autism. And, I think it's really important too, just like you said, Allison, that it's a lot of different things, but I know you all know the old adage, but it's so great to hear, say it again. You've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And we have to be able to navigate that for our young women, that it's not going to always look the same kind of cookie cutter. But at the end of the day, it's helping them be able to be the most productive and most independent and most kind of mentally healthy women that they can be, because as you've seen in so many examples from Caitlin and Carly, that everybody has something to offer. It's sometimes just unlocking that.
Molly, thank you. That was great. Thank you very much. All of you guys. I'd like to go ahead and open it up to any questions. So I'm going to ask that you either, you can type it into the chat, and Suzanne's going to monitor that for us. Or we got a small enough group, I think if you raise your hand, maybe Suzanne can make sure you're unmuted. So any questions or comments? Suzanne, you seeing anybody? Go ahead, and if not, I have a few while you guys are thinking.
There's one question. Do you have recommendations for disclosing at work?
I can actually take that one because I do teach about accommodations, and I work in corporate America, but I've mentored a lot of people all over the country in work situations, and so really what it boils down to is if there's a need for an accommodation during the interview process, then it is okay to ask for an accommodation. You don't necessarily have to say what your diagnosis is at that point. When you are offered the job, at that point, if you know you're going to need an accommodation after you've been offered the job, you can ask at that point. It's entirely up to you when you get into a job, when you see the climate and the culture of the workplace. Are they very, do they have a good diversity and inclusion program set up? Do they encourage employees to disclose? You may find there are situations where you need to have a conversation with your manager or HR because you do need some sort of an accommodation. It could be something as simple as being able to get instructions in writing instead of just having them verbally told to you in a large staff meeting. Or, and so sometimes you can ask for things like that without even actually having to disclose. My personal belief is that the more of us that disclose, the less stigma there will be around it, because they'll see, oh my gosh, she does such an amazing job and she has autism. And so the more that we disclose, the more that it's going to help future generations. I've had it go either way. Before I worked for my current company, I worked for a company that was very into customer service. That publicly, that was their thing. That was all they cared about, was customer service. They also had an internal policy that says you could never work overtime. And so I had a customer come in 3 minutes before we were supposed to close. I was the only person working, and it was either help them or they would have to sleep in their car that evening. And so I chose to help them so that the poor woman didn't have to sleep in her car that night. And I got fired. Of course, 3 days earlier, I had put in an accommodation request for them in writing, and I had a copy of it, for them to tell me which is more important, not working overtime at all or customer service. And they ignored it, and I won the lawsuit. So so it's one of those things where some companies are going to be really great. The company I work for now, when they got rid of their work from home program, I said, I need to keep working from home for these reasons. And I've been working from home for 10 years. So it really varies, and it is definitely up to your individual situation. And sometimes it'll go well, sometimes it won't. But in the long run, we all need to look at disclosing just for the sake of, reducing the stigma.
Carly, any of the other panelists want to comment?
Yes, I do. I would recommend framing disclosure within the context of a strength. Say, this is what I'm working on and this is what I need, like what you're doing. Like if you have a disability and say writing expression, you can say, I use Grammarly to help me, but I also need this. So I highly recommend framing disclosure within the context of also a strength that you have.
That's great. And that reminds me, Caitlin, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's also the frame of, I can do amazing things for the company if you just get me Dragon Naturally Speaking so that I can do speech to text, or if you just diagram this out as a process flow instead of giving me the step-by-step.
are there some other questions?
There is one question asking for the panelists' opinion about the pros and cons of seeking a diagnostic evaluation as an adult.
Anybody want to take that?
I can try to. It can provide context for what you might have suspected throughout your lifetime. But also I don't. It could be also maybe self-limiting. I used my initial diagnosis as a limit and as a crutch, so to speak. And I had to realize that I didn't get accommodations in college and high school, and I did so well. And it was kind of startling and jolting when I first got my diagnosis. So I think taking it within context of what you achieved and what you want to achieve, the diagnostic evaluation.
Yeah, for me, it was finding the answers. Having a final explanation for why I was the way I was. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a webinar by the National Association of Mental Illness, but they have a slide that lists every single mental health diagnosis. At one point or another in my life, I've been diagnosed with every single thing on there except for eating disorders because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. There was one doctor who talked to me for 15 minutes, and because I told her I was convinced that I was different from everybody else, she put me on a really heavy antipsychotic and thought I was schizophrenic. And it nearly put me in a coma. So, for me, finding the answers and having the explanation, I didn't even know that sensory issues existed before my diagnosis. And I have 1 million, and now I teach my local law enforcement about sensory issues. So, it's executive functioning, like, oh, what, something you need an executive assistant for when you're really high up at a company? What is executive functioning? Well, okay, so I'm good at some things, but I'm not so good at other things. So, if anybody wants to be hired as a meal planner, I'm looking for one. That's the type of thing where I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not. And just having that context and having the community, especially online, autistic women to be able to relate to and run questions past and say, hey, has anybody else got like this? Having like sisterhood is huge. Whenever I hear of a woman being diagnosed online, my first comment on her post is, welcome to the Neuro Tribe. Because it's for me, it's a beautiful thing to finally know where that I belong and that I'm not alone.
That's great. Thank you. And I know that when we have adults who come to us, it's not easy to get a diagnosis. There are fewer resources for adults. There are. I see Lauren. Thank you. I think that adults, they read books. I had a gentleman come in once. He was my age, 50-ish, holding a book and saying, my wife thinks I have autism, and I agree. And so sometimes it's self-diagnosis, but it is difficult to find a professional, even in our area, enough professionals who really understand autism, and then autism in adults, and then autism for women, and how that might look. Dr. Radner, you've got some insights there?
Yes, it is an uphill battle. That's probably the biggest con, is if you're wanting a formal diagnosis, it is very hard, as Melissa was saying, to find someone who's qualified to do that. Some resources in this area. Johns Hopkins does have an adult autism center, so they can do that. There are also a number of private practices for which you will pay private practice dollars, but there are private practices that have this expertise. So Stixrud and David Black's practice, the Center for Assessment and Treatment, both have good reputations in this area. Those are more down in my neck of the woods, down towards Rockville and DC. And that's such a bummer. Thank you for sharing that, Carolina. I'm so sad that they're not taking anyone. The other resource that folks have used a lot is going through the NIH, and especially in this area, you can hightail it right over to Bethesda, but looking at some of the clinical research trials that are ongoing, there has been an increasing recognition from the National Institute of Mental Health that autistic children, in fact, grow up and they don't just stop being humans, they become autistic adults, and we should maybe know a little bit about what it's like to be an autistic adult. So there are still not a plethora, but a growing number of studies trying to understand autistic adults, both through the National Institutes of Health as well as through other organizations. And that's often a little backdoor that folks will use because you have to go through some amount of evaluation and diagnostic process to qualify for those studies. So getting that information can be a more affordable option.
And I do want to mention that if you are going to go down the route for adult diagnosis, like she said, if the places that Dr. Ratner knows aren't available, you definitely want to do a word of mouth, like check with local folks online who's competent in diagnosing women. I actually keep a list across the country. And so, Dr. Ratner, if you've got any, let me know and I'll add them to my list and I'll be happy to share it with you. But yeah, I have women all over the country. I just referred to someone in Massachusetts the other day. And so the key, though, is when you go in there, if you've developed coping mechanisms on how to deal with life, you have to prepare yourself ahead of time to strip those away. Never tell a diagnostician, I have problems with this, but I've learned to deal with it. Because they're like, well, okay, then it's not a problem because you've learned to deal with it. So you want to be raw, you want to be real, you want to just strip yourself down to the bare bones of who you are and be that person at the diagnostic interview. If you've got problems that you're embarrassed to tell everybody else about, you've got to tell that diagnostician.
And we do have a list of some resources at the office, and I appreciate the comment that Bayview Hopkins is not taking anybody else, but we do have some private practitioners that we know are good, and that's another challenge is that often they aren't taking new patients, or it's months to wait, and you're ready to get your diagnosis, and you have to wait. So yeah, Dr. Ratto, if you have other resources down your neck of the woods, we certainly would appreciate that. And I know the Autism Society of America, which is where our list comes from, some of those resources, the national has some resources as well. So thank you. Other questions, Suzanne?
There's one question asking for tips for making friends and enlarging your social circle, and that may also be related to how women with autism can network and what kind of groups there are out there. So, anyone take a stab at that?
I might also just say, I think one of the things I've needed to recognize, actually in both my kids, is that it's okay if they're not having, getting friends. Like, I think sometimes people, and maybe the adults, Caitlin and Carly will disagree with this, but I think it's okay to have, they're pretty happy and they've learned to be friendly and have friendly interactions. Do they, hang out all the time with, a group of friends? No, but I think that's the other piece that I would probably also say to parents is that lots of time these things will, they want to be happy too. And I think it's okay to kind of find ways in different ways as long as they're, having those connections. So I've learned to kind of sit back on some of these things and as long as they're getting, therapies in schools and pieces like that. I've also found, especially with autism, is milestones often get met later, and when you're a parent, sometimes it's a real panic, like they haven't met this milestone or they haven't met this milestone, but I've seen my children just with enough time, even if they really wanted to do it, to reach there, like riding a bike and swimming and doing all these things. My daughter actually sucked her thumb for many years and, 10 or 11. And I just remember thinking, yeah, but it was a sensory soothing for her. And I'd rather her have that than worry about a stigma about sucking a thumb. So I guess I just want to put that little caveat that it's okay not to have always be forcing for a friendship.
Yes.
I would agree with what Molly is saying. My whole focus was on trying to find friends, and that consumed me a lot. And I I've learned balance with having time with friends and also more independent activities. You know, I don't need to be around my friends all the time. I can do other activities by myself.
Yeah, when I was in high school, my parents knew there was something wrong, but they couldn't tell what. So I actually wasn't allowed to get a job in high school. I was required to spend time focusing on trying to have a social life. Like that was actually said in our house. And so I'm like, okay, well, you gonna pay for my college? But yeah. So they did. And then when it came time to go to college, I had to make a choice. Do I go to a really great out-of-state school, or do I stay in state so I can join a sorority? And I chose to stay in state and join a sorority. And it's funny because on the college campus that I went to, there's a very big divide between the Greeks and the non-Greeks. And the non-Greeks, their biggest argument is, "Oh, you're going to buy your friends." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to buy my friends." You know, so I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. So, but I met some really wonderful women that way, and what a couple of them I actually do still in touch with, and you know, it was never like, "Oh my gosh, you're my new best friend" or anything like that. But I had a social life. I got to have friends. Of course, I ended up degree away on something that wasn't that difficult when my heart later on, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have gotten a physics degree. But that didn't happen. So I have a great journalism degree instead, and I can write about my autism experiences. So
I think it really does, take that piece. Like my daughter, I'm constantly trying to get her to go to the social events at the school, and she's like, "No, not interested." And I've kind of learned to go, well, that as long as you're, but she did a jewelry making club after school, and she did a horseback riding. So when it was right and fit her needs, she went and did that. And, again, she doesn't have the best of friends or whatever, but I think it's really important to let, especially our teenager girls with autism, be who they want to be. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm constantly like, oh, should I push on this? But I've learned to I think it's really important for them to get there on their own pace.
Yeah, I did a lot of clubs in high school, and I will say now there's quite a few groups out there on Facebook. There's one that's called Autistic Women that was founded by Dana and Michelle. That I know both of them very well, and it's a really supportive environment, well moderated. There's over 6,000 members from around the world, and you don't have to have a formal diagnosis. You just have to identify as being autistic. Like if that's one of the main groups where a woman's child gets diagnosed with autism, and the next thing she knows, she's like, "Oh, I must have this too." So that, I'd love to see statistics out on adults with autism, because the CDC statistics are based on 8-year-olds, and there's nobody keeping track of those of us that get diagnosed later in life. My dream is to have it be a census question someday. So that would be, I think, I missed the boat this time around, but that's my goal for 10 years from now. So
that's great. Thank you all. Great info. And so I'm going to add that to our resource list. And I saw that Anne posted too, Asperger's from the Inside. So Anne will add that as well. Thank you. And if anybody else has other resources they want to stick in the chat, we'll capture those as well. So we're getting to be about just about 8:20. Any other questions in there, Suzanne? And I want to start to kind of wrap up. And please know we're going to share the resource list with everybody. It'll be posted on the website along with this recording, because I hope that more people will take advantage of your terrific stories and advice. So anything else in there?
Yeah, well, I'm looking through, there were just a few questions when people registered. There was one question about how can I continue to support our 17-year-old daughter make the transition from one-to-one instruction in non-public community-based setting to entering college and or the workforce and interacting with peers and other people. We want her to be independent and and have a self-fulfilling life.
So I think our self-advocates, Carly and Caitlin, can probably answer this in even more detail. But what I would say is one of the things that I've learned over the years that's so thrilling is life doesn't actually stop at 18 or 19 or 20. It keeps going. And I think very often parents feel really pressured that if something isn't done by a certain age, that it's just never going to happen. But actually, we continue growing our entire lives. And in some ways, I think that's even more true for those of us who are neurodiverse, because you're already having to learn so many other things that those of us who are neurotypical weren't working on. So I really encourage families, and I'm having this conversation when kids are 9 and 10, to slow it down. Is an extra year of high school needed, or 2 or 3? Do you have to go straight to college? Could you spend some time working or taking some online classes or some community college classes and trying out some different things? How do you kind of step through different paces and have different experiences so that the ultimate journey that you have is one that's marked by steps where you feel like you're building a pathway towards something that brings you joy, as opposed to ramming through something, ending up crashing and falling apart, which unfortunately we do see at times, where very bright students go off and completely fall apart at college or in the workplace because of some of the things like executive functioning that Carly was speaking about. And it's because we just push them too soon and too quickly based on an arbitrary timeline. So my biggest advice is just slow it down. It's okay.
And that reminds me, Alison, like, you know, if anyone is stuck with us this long who has a daughter who's not speaking, I just want to say that don't ever give up on communication. I have a good friend, Sam, who could not communicate at all until he was 16 years old, when he learned RPM, and his mother had been reading him textbooks all along. He'd been listening in class all along. And he ended up graduating from high school with honors as a typer. He ended up graduating from California State University Channel Islands with honors, and now he's in law school. So, you know, you never know. Always presume competence. That's the number one thing that you can walk away with, is you've got a young one that you just haven't been able to communicate with. Presume competence. Assume they're listening. Don't talk negatively about them around them. They're hearing you. Even if they can talk, don't talk negatively around them. They're hearing you. I see that so often. I'll talk to a parent. I'm like, can we take this into another room? Your child's right here. So.
I think the other piece is that we're starting to see, I mean, I've often said with my 18 and 21-year-old, I almost wish they were about 5 years younger, because the amount of more resources and programs, I think we're seeing so many colleges create kind of autism track or autism groups, you know, kind of going through. There's a lot more colleges. Beacon is one I know that's very popular with a lot of the families, a couple others that, you know, are really welcoming to neurodiverse students. And even locally, Montgomery College, you know, has, you know, different kind of, you know, the graduate transition program, or ability to take a few classes and kind of slow down. So the advice that I would give to that parent, and I'm looking at it too, is look around and see, because there's some, just as Allison said, there can be some stepping stones. And I think universities are pretty smart. They're realizing this is a huge population, and they're going to want to have the, you know, those young people in some way, shape, or form in their universities and colleges. So they're really, I think, you know, in 5 years, I think we're going to see even more accommodations and openness to neurodiverse students in secondary education.
Guys, Suzanne, anything else in there to address? Or you said there were some questions. Thank you for remembering.
Yeah, there's a question here about advice about being a mother who has autism to neurotypical children.
Well, I saw Dr. Ratto put in the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. They're really good. It used to be just the Autistic Women Network. They changed their name. They've got some great resources, great books out there. But, you know, I have a toddler myself, and I say that one of the biggest things that has helped me in my journey as a mother is actually being autistic. You know, when my son is upset and screaming and crying and throwing a tantrum, like there was one time when he was at the breakfast table, would not calm down, completely out of control. I followed his line of sight and I saw there was a blue ball in the backyard that had not gotten put away the night before in the toy box. So I opened the door, I went outside, I put the ball away, instantly stopped crying and went back to doing his breakfast. This is before he could talk when he was little. But, you know, I focus really on communication with him. Whenever he's upset about something, communication is the key to anything that has to do with behavior, regardless if your child is typical or neurodivergent. It's all about communication. It's all about figuring out what the upset is. It's no different from when they're a baby and crying and you need to know if it's a diaper or food. It's the same no matter what age they are. It's, you know, anytime they get upset, it's because they can't either communicate their feelings, communicate their wants, communicate their needs, communicate their physical distress. That's the key to all, in my opinion.
I would add self-care is really, really important for any parent, but I think autistic women I have found as a group tend to be this incredibly empathetic bunch who can really take on other people's feelings in a very intense way. So please do not throw yourself so wholly into motherhood that you don't take some time for yourself, because that is a fast route to burnout. So self-care is critical.
Thank you. That's great.
There is one other thing. It's not really a question, and it sort of gets to the heart of some of this, I think. Someone comments that my experience has been that my traits have been misjudged as a lack of confidence, which I think is very gendered. So perhaps we could finish with some of the panelists commenting on that. And I don't know if the person who made this comment would like to offer a specific trait that she may be thinking of, or whether the panelists have some ideas about that.
Well, I think you could actually turn that to your advantage. So when there's a woman that I work with who's an executive in technology, which is really rare for a female to be a technology executive. And I noticed that when I'm in meetings with her, she's quiet for almost the entire meeting, letting everybody figuratively yell and scream at each other and hash out all the issues and problems. And then at the end, she says, okay, now I think let's make sure this is our action plan. And I see this is what we've come to as the decision. And so I have friends with auditory processing issues where they're the same way, where they don't participate in the active discussion. But if at the end you can summarize what you think everybody's tried to say, so that you're contributing, but that way you don't have to worry about contributing during the meeting, main part of the meeting. You can just sort of focus on listening and worry about contributing later after you've processed everything. It's just an example that I can think of.
Anybody else? All right. Anything else, Suzanne, in there?
I see there was a comment about tone of voice. I took acting classes to figure that out.
That's a great idea. That is a terrific idea, and I know that some of our young people do that. That's great.
There's even specific ones you can do for like learning how to do voiceovers that really just focus on the voice and not also the physical manifestation.
Perfect.
In graduate school, I took a speech class. It's not really related to my autism, but I'm just maybe shy by nature. So that helps me with being a better communicator.
That's great. Thanks, Caitlin.
I
Anybody else?
think that's about it for questions. But if I missed something, put it in the chat now.
That's great. Well, we're getting up here till 8:30. I don't want to keep our wonderful panelists all night. do you all have any closing remarks? Anything that you feel like was you'd like to say that didn't get said or share?
Thanks for having me.
Indeed.
I'm so excited. You were all wonderful, but I've always wanted to have Carly because I did hear her speak one other time, and I thought she was so terrific. And then the panel came together so nicely. I'm really, really excited. I know I learned a lot, and that's another reason we wanted to do this. We want to serve the women in our community in a better way. And I will say also that we did start a women's support group before the pandemic, and then it kind of did not continue, sadly. I hope it'll pick up again. We do have an adult social group that meets on Saturday evenings at 5:30 online, and that's been a really nice group, mostly guys, but a growing number of women, and that's been really nice to see. And so if you're interested at all, you can just reach out to us at the office, and we'll get that. I see Lauren, you're interested. Maybe, hey, Suzanne, can you give her our email and make sure we connect her with Eric? It's a very nice group. They've been together about 3 years. They, like I said, meet every Saturday night virtually, and when they were in person, did all kinds of great things together. Lots of friendships outside the group, a couple romances, and that's been fun. So we're really pleased to see that continue. So, on behalf of the Autism Society, I just want to say thank you again to Carly and to Dr. Ratto, to Caitlin and Molly for joining us and sharing their stories and knowledge and with all of us. And thank you guys for being here with the Autism Society. We have lots of great things coming up, so I hope you'll check our calendar. And if there's anything we can do, we have a lot of resources right now. I know it's a challenging time, but we're here for everybody. Just reach out to the office, and Suzanne and I can do our very best to help you out. So thank you, everybody.
If I can give
please.
If I could give just one last plug,
Yes.
clinicaltrials.gov, Spark, Simons, any research trial out there that you are feeling generous of your time, you are almost always paid for your time. We desperately, desperately, desperately need women to tell us what autism is. So if you feel so inclined, look up those research opportunities. It's a good side hustle, and we would love to get your perspective. I'm currently involved in an Autism Center of Excellence grant that's specifically looking at girls and women. So keep your eyes out for that one.
Can you send us those sites, and we'll make sure that they get pushed out as well? Absolutely.
I will.
No,
you do not have to be diagnosed prior. We will evaluate you as part of the process. Come sneak in the back door with us. We would love to have you.
Great. Wonderful. All
Thanks,
right,
everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Bye, guys.